Hi, everyone. I'm Anurag. I am your instructor for CE 222, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the next lab assignment, which is about multimodal transportation planning principles. And in here, you'll find the lab description, which I'm going to basically, this is a Google Doc link that I'm going to talk a little bit about. So we can just go ahead and click on that. So that takes us there. So I could do a right click and open it into a new window. New tab would be better. Let's just do new tab. And then there are a bunch of documents here, which are planning principles for downtowns, OCR. Basically, that OCR just represents that I've identified the text in that file, and it's now in accessible mode. And then there's an example analysis of downtown flow that is conducted by Dr. Amir Molan in a virtual setting. So you get to see how you can analyze a location, even just looking at the images from Google Maps and Google Earth to look at what type of multimodal planning principles are at work at that location, because you might have to do the same thing if you're doing it for the campus. Then I have the planning principles for the universities. Again, it's in OCR mode, so that means it's an accessible document for screen readers and so forth. And then there is the lab assignment link for submitting. When I'm done with recording this video, I'm going to post that here as well. So let's go ahead and get started on the document here, and I'm going to go ahead and open it fully in the new window. So this lab is about land use and transportation and how those two interact to provide services for users who are using a different mode. And the definition of a land use is like, how you're utilizing a parcel of the land, right? If there is a parcel of land in a city, how is that going to be, utilized? And a lot of time there is zoning laws. So some parcels of the land are zoned for residential, for example, some for industrial, some for commercial, some for retail. All of that complicated sort of zoning structure exists in our cities. And obviously, universities represent a unique type of land use. And for all different types of land use, there are planning principles that have been outlined by various organizations, various documents. But then the one that we are going to be using in this class, and a lot of professionals also use, is this one right here, which is the Transportation Planning Handbook published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And so you could see that there is a documentation that calls Transportation Planning Principles for Typical Downtown. So what you will see is that there is going to be sort of circulation principles. There's going to be parking principles or storage. You might say broadly, car parking principle, for example, so when we say traffic circulation, you're talking about primarily the automobile mode. But then if you come down this list here, and then there's parking principles that, again, primarily relating to the automobile mode. And then you have the pedestrian circulation principles, right? So pedestrians don't have to worry about the parking piece at all. And then you have the transit principles. For transit, you might have, again, access to transit, circulation of the transit or the bus or whatever. And then you have the storage of the transit, like where the transit stop is located, where is the transit depot, and all of that. So this is, again, you could see that this is planning principles for downtowns. So this is that document, and this OCR just represents that I've run the OCR on it, so you can actually select text from it and copy paste it. So I'm going to be asking you to analyze some of these principles that are listed here. So I'm just going to ask you to analyze 2 of these principles for all of the 3 modes that we are going to have in the lab assignment. Then you have, if you go back on your main page, you have planning principle for universities. You can click on that. And then if I click on, come on, again, this is a text recognized document. So you should be able to copy paste text from it if needed. Here you could see For typical college, university, or medical campus, what are the transportation planning principles? Campus access and circulation, pedestrian circulation, again, transit circulation. And then for bicycle, you have the bicycle circulation and parking. And then the emergency access for medical center. So this does not apply to the university, for example. This is for sort of, when you have emergency vehicle accessing the facility, and this is not going to be applicable for us, even though it's part of the same chapter in the Transportation Planning Handbook. Remember, the title of this chapter is Medical Campus Included, but we are not going to actually do that. We're just doing it for Cal Poly campus. Okay, so these are some of the planning principles. And again, this is coming from the Transportation Planning Handbook. Now, let's go back to our actual assignment. Universities represent a unique type of land use. The IT Transportation Planning Handbook is one reference that presents generally acceptable principles for this type of activity center. Okay, so the second document that I showed you talks about what are the accepted principles, what constitute a good university plan, right? For this assignment, what might be helpful to you is looking at the Cal Poly Master Plan. So if you look at Cal Poly Master Plan, you will see elements of parking. In the master plan, you might find a lot of elements that are not relevant for transportation, but I think definitely the circulation element would be very relevant, and anything related to parking would also be pretty relevant. So when you're looking at this master plan, so if I can go back to it, I can copy paste and open another link for it. So if you go back here, this is a June 2019 Cal Poly Master Plan, and you could see, so there is background information. So there is going to be a lot of sort of campus setting and history, which is all important in general, but maybe not the thing that you have to focus on at this point. So you will see here, this environment and infrastructure, right? This transportation and circulation infrastructure. This is where you want to focus most of your sort of energies as you sort of evaluate our campus on how good does it, how effectively does it adhere to the principles of good transportation planning for university campuses. Okay. So here is what I'm asking you to do. First of all, you should see, because a lot of you would be in virtual setting and will not be able to visit campus, this assignment is designed so that you can sort of analyze that based on your existing knowledge of the campus, plus looking at some web images and some like Google searching and things like that. You should be able to finish this assignment. So what is the lab question that you're dealing with here? How well does the Cal Poly adhere to generally accepted surface transportation principles for universities and to emerging practices that will likely guide the future of the practice? Now, where do you find these generally acceptable transportation principles and emerging practices? You will find that in the document that I just showed you under the planning principles for universities. That's where you'll find the document. Now, once you sort of review all the existing principles for different modes, here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to adopt a select set of surface transportation, multimodal transportation planning principles for universities, no fewer than 2 principles for each of the 3 modes. So I'm asking you to sort of analyze this information for 3 different modes. First is bike, then pedestrians, and then transit. Okay, so we're sort of looking at more sustainable modes of transportation beyond the automobile in this lab. And classify the principles you select for each mode into one of the 3 categories. Do these principles that you've identified, do they relate with access? Like how do people actually access that mode? Do they relate to circulation? Like how that mode, if you're using that mode, how does that mode move along campus? And then last one is the storage, right? Storage is for pedestrian, for example, for pedestrian modes. So storage is mostly about parking, and storage obviously is not an issue for pedestrians, because if you're a pedestrian, you're basically going to go where you need to go. You don't need to be don't need to be parking yourself away from the final destination. For the pedestrian, you park yourself at your final destination, right? So what I want you to do is I want you to look at some example principles and their categorization into access, circulation, and storage below. So here is some example that I provide for bicycle principles. For access, a trail and greenway plan, pretty path and trail that is completely separate from roads, separated bike lane. So those will be sort of your access, provide a more comfortable skill experience for less skilled riders so that they feel that, bike mode is accessible to them. Circulation, what's the bike lane width? Does that provide enough capacity for bicyclists to move? And there might be more, right? So at least 5 feet wide lanes or more. And then it's your job to kind of look at, like, if you don't want to analyze these principles, because you have to pick 2 principles each for each mode, right? So, and then for parking storage, bike storage should be an easy view from the surrounding area, should be adjacent to the area of interest. So does Cal Poly provide that or not provide that, right? So that's the question you're trying to answer. Same thing for pedestrians, but you could see for pedestrians, there's no parking mode. There is no parking related principle. There's no parking categorization for pedestrians, as I mentioned before. But then again, you could have the trail and greenway plan, accessibility for people with disabilities. And you will see it in Dr. Molan's video. He talks about if the downtown building where there is a bus stop, is that an accessible bus stop? Is that an easy access? The bus stop itself is probably accessible, but does that provide easy access for the people who might be coming out of one of the buildings in downtown? Do they have enough access as a disabled individual? For circulation, are there refuge islands on wider roads? So refuge islands are basically what you'll find on the median of the roads when the width that the pedestrians are trying to cross is too wide. You need to provide some kind of a refuge island in the middle. So are those things exist? And then there, again, as I said, this is just a very short list. And I would love for you to look up more planning principles that you can find from this document that I showed you earlier, from this planning principles for universities document. You should be able to find more planning principles and categorize them, whether they belong in the access category or the circulation category, or if applicable, the parking category. And then same thing I have here for transit, for access, for circulation, for planning, for parking and storage. So here is your goal. Evaluate the extent to which Cal Poly adheres to the principles you identified. It's your job to pick 2 principles for each of the modes, right? And for all of those 6 principles, because there are 3 modes and you'll identify 2 principles each, for each of those 2 principles, you will evaluate, does Cal Poly as a campus adhere to, or mostly adheres to, or loosely adheres to, or weakly adheres to, right? So this is basically 3 categorization of how good of a job the campus is doing in implementing those principles in our campus. Conduct your evaluation by gathering evidence in the form of anecdotal narratives. So this could be something that comes from your experience. You can look at the maps and images. You might be able to get some measurements on how wide the bike lanes are, for example, using Google Map, and quantities if you have some, enough information about what percentage of our intersections are easily accessible and things like that. Now, it may be hard for your group to analyze the whole campus. So what I've done is I've divided the campus into 5 areas, and your group needs to base the findings on 3 or 4 zones. So if your group has 3 members, I'm looking for you to analyze 3 zones within Cal Poly. And if your group has 4 members, I'm looking for you to analyze 4 zones within Cal Poly. And then once you have done the analysis, you sort of integrate that analysis in the form of one memo at the end. So here are the 5 zones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can pick any 3 or any 4, depending upon how many members are in your group. But then make sure that you note that clearly. What zones are you analyzing so that I know the results you're getting? So document your finding in a memo with the following sections. objective and motivation, recommendation and findings, an example of somebody, how you might want to sort of, you could have the bicycle, pedestrian, and transit, whether your principle relates to access, circulation, or storage. And again, for pedestrian, storage won't be applicable. And then you could potentially provide an example, as just an example, 2 points for if it mostly adheres, if it provides that separated path in the area that you're analyzing for the most part, then you give it 2 points. But if it's inconsistent, then you only give it 1 point. And if it actually doesn't have it, or on a very small portion of the network, you see that they have, for example, accessible paths for pedestrians and disabled individuals with wheelchairs, then you will say 0 points. And then you can add the points. You could try to create something like depending upon how many points you have total. So you can sort of average them out for the whole campus. And then you could create some kind of a needle where, you could have some thresholds, like, if you're with 7 or above, then you become like sort of good. And then if it's, whatever, like if it's something like 16 or above, then that becomes an excellent thing or mostly adheres to. And if it's less than, let's say, 7 points total for your planning principles, then you would say that this is very weak adherence to the planning principles. And what you'll need to do also in appendix is document support, like maps and images for your findings. Lead with principles that guided your evaluation. Conclude with thoughtfully organized evidence of Cal Poly adhering or not to these principles. And then I have a little rubric here, so you could evaluate your report in the self-evaluate your report before you submit, and then I'll be happy to sort of grade it along these criteria, and these all add up to 100 points. So that's basically what your lab assignment tells you it is. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. And what I can do is I can go ahead and show you the groups as well. If you look at your groups here. So I'm going to look at the planning principle lab groups. And again, these are different groups than your first lab. And I have 5 again, 5, and then your spot speed study lab, pardon me. So you could see that there are 5 groups total. And it looks like, all groups have 4 students this time. Okay. So we don't have 4 students. Yeah. Oh, one of these groups has 5 students. So yeah, if you have 5 students, then you will be able to analyze all 5 groups. And if your group only has 4 students, then you will be able to analyze only 4 of the campus locations that were mentioned. So if you have 5 people, then you analyze the whole campus. If you have only 4 people, then you analyze any 4 of these zones potentially as your analysis. Okay. So you could see, and I'll post these group names also in the lab document. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And then just real quick, I want to show you what those principles look like for the universities. I gave you some examples already in that lab document. So if you go here, I gave you some examples here, but then what this document does is that actually does not provide a lot of times, doesn't separate it pretty neatly into access, circulation, and storage, right? So you might have to think about it a little bit as to which category does that fit into. Again, 2 principles for each of the 3 modes. So you're basically analyzing 6 principles, and ultimately for each of those 6 principles, how well does Cal Poly adhere to those principles or not? So that's what you need to be documenting. Okay. Again, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'll be going ahead and posting this video on your Canvas page. Thank you so much.